Chapter 11. The Silent Rift. The forest stretched endlessly beneath the dying light of sunset. Deep hues of crimson and gold bled through the canopy, splashing across the moss-laden ground. The air was cool and damp, thick with the earthy scent of fallen leaves. Dolo moved with weariness and on edge from the previous confrontation. His gaze flicked from shadow to shadow, ears straining for the faintest crack of an unfamiliar sound. The tension sat heavy on his shoulders. Behind him, Mako trudged through the undergrowth, footsteps heavier than usual. His jaw remained locked, eyes focused somewhere distant. The silence between the two had grown louder since their argument that morning. "Maybe if someone listened to me for once. Maybe if you said something that didn't involve smashing everything to pieces." The words echoed in Dolo's mind like a festering wound. He slowed his pace until Mako was beside him. "You've been quiet." Mako didn't respond. "You can't stay upset at me forever." Mako's hand tightened on his axe haft. "I'm not upset." Dolo huffed. "Really? Then what's with the stomping?" Mako stopped abruptly. The ground beneath his feet crackled faintly, like stone fracturing under pressure. He turned to face Dolo, eyes shadowed beneath his brow. "The mana doesn't sing for me like it does for you," he said. "You make it look easy. The wind moves with you like it's your friend. Me? It fights me. The earth pulls, pushes, whispers things I don't understand." His knuckles whitened. "It's like standing on the edge of a cliff, and I can't tell if the ground's going to catch me or let me fall." Dolo's anger drained away, replaced by something colder. Worry. "You should have said something. And here you tell me to meditate more, to breathe through it." Mako shook his head. "It doesn't work like that." Fenra's voice cut softly through the quiet. "Let him walk his own path, young wolf." The alpha wolf stood watching Mako. The group pressed on at a fast pace, weaving through the dense, silent forest. The towering trees stretched like dark sentinels overhead, their ancient limbs swaying slightly in the chilled night air. The usual sounds of the wild, chirping insects, rustling leaves, distant hoots of owls, had faded, swallowed by the oppressive quiet that clung to the woods like a living thing. Only the rhythmic crunch of boots against damp earth and the occasional snap of twigs beneath hurried steps broke the silence. Aros trudged beside Waya, his breath coming in slow, deliberate exhales. He hadn't spoken much since leaving the village, his golden eyes distant, his small hands occasionally clenching and unclenching as though grasping at something unseen. Waya kept a steadying hand on his shoulder, guiding him forward with quiet patience. Kaelin and Arindra followed close behind, their movements deliberate, bows at the ready. Pip and Phoenix flitted between the trees, moving with the effortless silence of their kind, their keen eyes scanning the shadows. Even the wolves padded cautiously through the undergrowth, their hackles raised, their ears flicking toward distant sounds no human could hear. Something trailed them. Dolo could feel it. Not quite seen, not quite heard, but present, lingering just beyond the edges of their awareness. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest whisper of something foul, something wrong. Then Fenra spoke, her voice low and sure. "We should find a place to stop," Dolo murmured, glancing toward Mako, "before we push too far." Mako nodded but said nothing. Dolo turned to Fenra. "What do you think?" The alpha wolf sniffed the air, ears twitching. "Ahead, a small clearing nestled between the roots of the elder trees. You will be shielded there." Dolo glanced toward Mako again, who seemed lost in thought. He gestured ahead. "Let's check it out." The two of them broke off from the group, moving through the undergrowth with practiced ease. The air grew cooler as they weaved between thick trunks, stepping over gnarled roots. The forest had grown even darker here, as if the trees themselves were wary. Dolo pushed aside a tangle of vines and stepped into a clearing. The place was as Fenra described, hidden between the roots of massive trees, their ancient limbs forming a natural canopy overhead. A shallow creek trickled nearby, its water clear and glistening in the dim moonlight. Mako exhaled slowly. "This'll do." Dolo watched him as he set his axe against a fallen log, rolling his shoulders as if trying to shake off the weight of the day. The silence between them stretched, heavy and unspoken. "You don't have to carry it all alone," Dolo said finally. Mako gave a short, humorless chuckle. "And who else is going to carry it?" Dolo stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We're all carrying something. But if you keep holding on to whatever this is, whatever the mana is doing to you, it's going to break you, Mako." Mako's grip tightened around his hands, but he didn't respond. Dolo let the silence linger before sighing. "Come on, let's bring the others. We all need rest." Mako didn't move immediately, but after a moment he nodded. Without another word, they turned back toward the others, the quiet of the forest pressing in around them. Dolo crouched near the fire pit, prodding the embers with a stick. The flames crackled softly, their warmth pushing back the cold that clung to the night. Across the fire, Aro sat cross-legged, hands resting in his lap, golden eyes reflecting the flickering light. He hadn't spoken much since leaving the village, but his gaze kept drifting toward the sky, as if searching for answers in the stars. Mako sat with his back against a fallen log, his axe across his knees. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tense. His eyes never left Aros. Waya sat beside the boy, her staff planted in the earth beside her. The mana shard, wrapped in leather, hung from her neck, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Kaelin, her apprentice, sat close by, eyes heavy with exhaustion but her posture alert. Arindra stood a few paces from the fire, scanning the tree line. The leaf dancer's bow was strung and ready in her hand. Her sharp features were set in concentration, her red hair glimmering like molten copper. Fenra and the wolves had moved beyond the camp to patrol the area. The silence they left behind made the woods feel larger, emptier. Dolo broke the quiet. "Should we set more traps?" Mako shook his head. "Already did. No one's getting through without me hearing them." Aros looked up from the fire. "Unless they move through the shadows." Mako stiffened. "Right. Unless that." Arindra lowered her bow. "The shadow tribes won't stop. We wounded them at the crater, but they know where we're headed. Varokan doesn't give up his prey." Dolo's stomach clenched at the name. "The Whisper Stone said he's trying to find the Mana's heart. If we reach the Everwood Glade first, we might find the answers we need." "And if we don't?" Mako asked. "Then we fight," Waya said simply. The fire crackled in agreement. The wolves' howls shattered the quiet. Dolo shot to his feet, spear in hand. Mako was already beside him, axe raised. Arindra drew and knocked an arrow in one fluid motion. The sound came from the southern ridge, where they'd set their traps. Fenra's mental voice came through the bond. "Intruders. 2. Small and quick." "Small?" Dolo whispered aloud. Mako's brows furrowed. "Scouts?" Dolo shook his head. "Fenra said they're small." Kaelin gripped her dagger. "Could be shadow imps." "No," Fenra said. "They smell like foxes." "Foxes?" Dolo repeated. Arindra lowered her bow slightly. "Moon shards." The air shifted again. A faint metallic clang echoed from the ridge, followed by a high-pitched yelp. Dolo motioned for the others to stay put and moved toward the sound. Mako followed, axe in hand. Arindra took up the rear. They stalked through the darkness, guided by faint, scuffling sounds ahead. The trap's mechanism glimmered faintly in the moonlight. Suspended upside down from a rope snare, dangled a fox-like creature, Its white-furred tail swayed beneath it, twitching with agitation. It wore patchwork leather armor strapped with pouches and belts. Twin daggers hung from its belt. Its long ears flopped as it wriggled in place. "Let me go, you flea-bitten mutts," it hissed, voice sharp and rapid. Mako raised an eyebrow. "Is that a talking fox?" The creature stopped wriggling and swiveled its head toward them. Its eyes glimmered silver in the moonlight. "Talking. Talking? What, you've never seen a moon shard before? What rock did you crawl out from?" Dolo stepped forward. "You're moon shard, from the eastern clans." Yeah, that's me. Fennex of the Silver Paw Den, Master Scout, Rogue Extraordinaire." He puffed his chest, despite hanging upside down. "And I demand you release me immediately." "Master Scout?" Mako snorted. "Hanging from a snare trap isn't very masterful." Fennex's ears flattened. "Look, the trap was unfairly placed. Who hides snares near a perfectly good berry bush?" A rustling sound came from the undergrowth to their right. Mako spun toward it, axe raised. A second, much smaller fox darted from the bushes and tripped over a tree root with a startled squeak. This one was smaller and fluffier, with pale gray fur. A tiny dagger was strapped awkwardly to her hip. "Oops," the small fox muttered, hopping to her feet. Fennex groaned. "Pip, I told you to stay hidden." The little fox adjusted her dagger. "I was, but I got bored." Her eyes flicked toward the humans. "Hey, you've got snacks, right?" Mako blinked. "Snacks." Dolo lowered his spear. "You're thieves." "Professionals," Fennex corrected. "Rogues, actually, but yes. We may have been investigating your supplies." "By investigating, you mean stealing," Arindra said coldly. Fennex wriggled again. "Such an ugly word." Dolo knelt and examined the trap's knot. "What do you really want?" "Food, warm fire, and information," Fennex admitted. His silver eyes glimmered with more intelligence than his bumbling act suggested. "Mana's waking up, and where Mana goes, trouble follows. We felt the shift days ago." Dolo cut the rope. Fennex dropped to the ground with a yelp. Pip bounded over and poked his side. "See? I told you they'd let you go," she chirped. Yeah. He dusted himself off. "So, about that fire?" The Moonshard siblings sat by the flames with obvious delight, devouring dried venison and honeyed nuts. Pip sprawled on her stomach while gnawing on a smoked fish. Fennex sat cross-legged, eyes glinting with curiosity. "So," Fennex said, gesturing at the group, "what's with the glowy-eyed kid?" Aros stiffened. Mako glared. "None of your business." "Ah," Fennex sniffed. "So it's important." Pip looked up, mouth full of fish. "He smells like trees and lightning. Are you a wizard?" Aros shook his head. I don't know." Fennex raised a brow. "That's not reassuring." Dolo leaned forward. "You said you felt mana waking." "How?" Fennex shrugged. "We moonshards have sharp senses. Mana's like a ringing bell no one else hears. When it returned, it was like a whisper turning into a roar. Scared half our elders into hiding." His ears flicked toward the surrounding woods. "The shadow tribes are moving too. They're trying to corrupt the new mana streams." "We know," Waya said. She unwrapped the mana shard from her neck and set it beside the fire. The crystal pulsed faintly. Fennex's eyes widened. "Oh, that's pure mana." Pip reached toward it. Aros shifted slightly, his hand brushing the shard first. Mana flared upward like a spark catching dry tinder. The warmth rolled across the camp in waves. Fennex gasped and clutched his chest. "What the hell?" Pip's eyes glowed faintly. "It tickles," she squeaked. The light faded as Aros yanked his hand away. He looked at Dolo, eyes wide. It happened again. Waya studied the moon shards. Their breathing was uneven, their eyes unfocused. He's awakened them, she murmured. Mako groaned. Great. More glowing people. Phoenix rubbed his temples. What? What was that? Mana, Waya said. You've been attuned to it now. You're connected to the flow of the world. Pip rolled onto her back. I can feel the stars, and the dirt, and everything. Aros bit his lip. I didn't mean to, it just happens. Dolo squeezed his shoulder. We'll figure it out. Phoenix sat up straight. Okay, right. That was weird, but... He looked toward Pip, who gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up. We're in? In what? Mako asked. Phoenix gestured to the group. Whatever this is, big scary mana awakening, shadow tribes doing creepy stuff, the kid with the magic hands. You're obviously heading towards something important. Pip grinned. Yeah, and if you're gonna fight scary shadow people, you definitely need us. Mako pinched the bridge of his nose. We're recruiting thieves now? Dolo smiled faintly. They're more than thieves, and we'll need every ally we can get. Eros looked at the two fox siblings and managed a small smile. Thanks for not running away. Phoenix grinned. We never run from adventure, Pip giggled, unless it's really big, or really scary, or both. The fire crackled again, sending sparks into the night sky. Morning came with the hush of dawn, the sky painted in soft hues of violet and gold. The embers of their fire still smoldered, sending occasional wisps of smoke curling into the crisp air. Phoenix stretched lazily, flashing a sharp-toothed grin as his nose twitched toward the remnants of breakfast. His ears perked as he spotted it, one glorious half-eaten strip of dried meat sitting near the fire, abandoned, forgotten, ripe for the taking. Without hesitation, he swiped it up, twirling it dramatically between his fingers. Ah, what a tragedy, he sighed, shaking his head. To think such a fine piece of breakfast was left all alone, cast aside like an unloved orphan. But worry not, little morsel, I shall give you purpose. He opened his mouth to take a bite. Pip materialized out of nowhere. You shall do no such thing. She leaped like a tiny whirlwind of fur and chaos, tackling Phoenix with the force of a much larger creature. His triumphant snack-holding arm was immediately snared in her death grip. The sacred law of leftovers states that small ones get first dibs, she howled, dangling from his wrist like an angry squirrel. First dibs? Phoenix protested, twisting his body like a contortionist to keep the meat out of reach. I claimed it first. Pip climbed him, wrapping her tail around his leg like a grappling hook. Possession means nothing if you have no honor, you food-thieving bandit. Dolo, watching with the expression of a man who had seen too much of this nonsense, sighed. Can we please leave before they burn down the camp over a piece of jerky? Not before justice is served, Pip declared, finally launching herself onto Phoenix's shoulders. Unfortunately for him, Pip fought dirty. She grabbed his ears. Phoenix yelped, his eyes crossing. Ow! Low blow! His fingers loosened for just a moment, just enough for Pip to snatch the meat midair like a trained hawk. She landed a few feet away, nibbling triumphantly. Tastes like victory. Phoenix, still sprawled on the ground, groaned dramatically. I hope you choke. Aros blinked, watching the chaos with fascination. He turned to Kaelin. Is this a normal part of traveling? Kaelin rubbed her temples. When foxes are involved. Yes. Always. They set off into the forest, the morning mist curling around their legs as they followed the winding path deeper into the everwood. The air was still, unnaturally so, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The distant calls of birds faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Dolo was the first to notice. His steps slowed, his fingers tightening around his spear. There was something in the air, wrong, unsettling. Mako came to a stop beside him, nostrils flaring. "Something is off." Dolo nodded. "The air's heavy, stagnant." Arindra crouched by a tree, running her fingers over the bark. The texture was brittle, cracked like dried bone. She looked up, frowning. "The forest here is dying." "It's more than that." Kalen's voice was quiet but firm. She knelt, pressing her palm against the soil. Her dark hair fell over her shoulder as she closed her eyes, focusing. "There's a sickness here. The mana is tainted." Aros moved beside her, his golden eyes flickering. He touched the ground, and a faint pulse of mana spread outward. The response was immediate, an invisible ripple revealing veins of darkness beneath the surface, like blackened roots stretching deep into the earth. Waya, who had been silently observing, narrowed her eyes. "Shadow alchemy." Mako tensed. "Shadow tribes?" "Likely," Waya murmured. "But this isn't just their presence. This place has been poisoned." Pip wrinkled her nose. "Smells like rotten mushrooms and wet fur." Fennex, usually unfazed, had a grim expression. His fox-like ears flicked, and his tail bristled slightly. "Something's alive in that rot. I can hear it." The wolves had halted ahead of them. Fenra, the alpha, let out a low, warning growl. Then they saw it. A grove of trees, twisted and blackened, their bark split open as if something had burned from within. The roots were unnatural, curled and jagged, forming grotesque skeletal shapes that clawed at the earth. The once green canopy was nothing more than shriveled husks, leaves turned brittle and gray. At the grove's center stood a totem. Made of bones, iron, and strips of dried, cracked skin, the structure pulsed with a sickly green glow. The air around it hummed, vibrating with unseen energy. "The shadow tribes left this here," Arindra whispered. Waya exhaled slowly, her expression dark. "It's a siphon. They're draining the land's life force to fuel their corrupted magic." Aros stepped forward, but Kalen grabbed his wrist. "Careful." He hesitated, glancing at her. "The mana here is active," she said. "It's wrong." Aros knelt, extending his hand toward the ground. The moment his fingers brushed the soil, a wave of nausea rolled through him. His vision flickered. He saw flashes of dying trees, withering creatures, the land screaming. Then something looked back. His breath hitched as an unseen force pushed against him, shoving him backward. Kalen caught him before he fell completely. "I told you." Aros swallowed hard. "There's something alive in this corruption." "Burn it," Mako said flatly. Kalen shot him a sharp look. "That won't fix what's already been done." Mako scoffed. "It'll make me feel better." Dolo ignored him, stepping closer to the totem. The ground felt soft, unnatural, like walking across flesh instead of soil. His gut twisted. This place wasn't right. "Maybe we should leave it alone," Pip suggested. "Just a thought." "We can't," Waya said. "If we don't cleanse this place, the corruption will spread." Oros wiped his forehead, still shaken. "Can we destroy the totem?" Kalen considered. "If we do it the wrong way, we might make things worse." Arindra gripped her bow. "And if we do nothing, we know it will get worse." Dolo exhaled. "Then let's cleanse it." Kalen hesitated. "I might be able to redirect the mana, force it back into the land instead of letting it fester." Waya frowned. "That's dangerous." Kalen met her gaze. I know. Eros stepped beside her. I'll help. Kaelin hesitated, then nodded. The two knelt, pressing their hands to the earth. Kaelin's mana took on a deep green hue, pulsing in rhythm with nature itself. Eros's golden thread spiraled outward, weaving into her flow. The reaction was immediate. The ground shuddered. The corrupted roots twitched violently, as though sensing an intrusion. Then the totem screamed. The sound was not human. It was deep, guttural, angry. The trees around them snapped, their blackened branches twisting unnaturally. A wave of black mist erupted from the totem's base, and within it, shadows took shape. They came from the mist. Hunched, distorted figures, twisted remnants of the shadow tribes, their skin blackened, their eyes glowing red with hatred. Mako grinned. Finally, Dolo spun his spear, stepping forward. Looks like they found us first. Irindra's bowstring hummed as she loosed an arrow. The first shadow warrior shrieked as it struck, the corrupted flesh sizzling where mana met taint. Mako charged. His axe slammed into the first warrior, sending it sprawling. The ground beneath him cracked, veins of earth mana pulsing outward. Dolo moved like the wind. His flow of air propelled him, spear striking faster than the eye could follow. Kaelin held her ground beside Eros, hands trembling. The flow of nature crackled at her fingertips, struggling against the shadow's corruption. Eros clenched his fists. We need to finish the cleansing, now. Kaelin nodded. Cover us. Dolo twisted, slashing through another warrior. We're working on it. Fenix darted between the shadows, his daggers flashing. Pip created illusions, making three of herself sprint around the battlefield, confusing their enemies. Waya raised her staff. Hold them back. Eros and Kaelin pressed their hands back to the ground. The mana surged, this time, pushing back against the corruption. The totem's glow flickered. Then, suddenly, it cracked. The ground beneath it exploded, sending shadow warriors reeling. And in the center of the destruction, something pulsed. A mana shard. Silence followed. The last of the shadow mist dissipated, leaving only the charred remains of the totem. The twisted trees groaned as their roots uncurled, freed from corruption. Aros stood over the mana shard, his golden eyes reflecting its glow. It pulsed softly, humming in response to his presence. Kaelin knelt beside him, breathless. This wasn't supposed to be here. Irindra lowered her bow, wiping her forehead. What is it? Waya approached, her face unreadable. She extended a hand toward the shard. The moment her fingers touched it, she stiffened. The World Tree's gift, she murmured. Aros swallowed. He could feel it, mana, raw and unshaped, like a heartbeat in the earth. Dolo studied Aros and the mana shard. Irindra glanced at Aros. Do you think your boy knows what this thing is? Aros didn't answer. The mana shard pulsed again.